Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to show you how you can deploy a Flask app on GCP VM. So let's get into it. Alright, so first of all, head up to your Google Cloud Console and search up for Google Compute API. And you're going to see Compute Engine API, and you need to enable this API. Alright, after enabling, you can head up to the Compute Engine section, then in the VM instances, and create a new VM. You can select the configuration accordingly. I'll just keep the standard configuration, and I'll just change my shared code to E2 micro. And in the networking section, you need to allow HTTP and HTTPS traffic to make this available to public to access your web app. So now we can create this instance. All right, so as you can see, the instance has been created, and to keep the thing simpler, I have created a step-by-step text document for hosting your Flask app on the GCP VM. So we can start following this uh, text file. I'll put this text file in the GitHub repo. All right, so first of all, I'm going to connect this instance through SSH, and I'm going to authorize it to connect to it. Okay, so I'm connected to my GCP VM now, and I can start deploying my Flask app right now. All right, so first few step involves downloading the requirement packages in my Linux VM. So these goes like sudo update, then I'm going to install Python and Python's virtual environment and pip. Then I'm going to install Nginx, and I'm going to install Git for cloning a test Flask app, which I've built right here. All right, so we can install all the requirement packages in our Linux, and it will start installing. All right, so now I've installed all the packages in my VM, and I can start cloning my Flask app from my GitHub repo by just running the git clone command. All right, so I've copied my Flask app in my directory, which I can see here as test Flask. All right, I can go inside this directory and install the requirements from requirements.txt. All right, so before that, you actually need to build a virtual environment, which we can build using Python 3 -m venv, and then again the name of virtual environment you want to keep. I'll just keep venv here. Alright, so the virtual environment has been created. I can activate it using source, and then I can head up to the directory of venv/bin/activate, which will activate the virtual environment. Alright, so now I can actually install the requirements from for my Flask app in the Flask project directory, which is test Flask here. And now I can install the requirements using pip install r requirements.txt. That will start installing all the requirements. If Gunicon is not in your requirements, you can install it separately using pip3 install Gunicon. So now we can actually start uh, building our Nginx service. Nginx service is basically used for proxy passing. Basically, your VM has an open port at port 80, which is the HTTP port, where the public will actually access your web app. So you need to connect that port with your Flask app. So basically, we have to map the port 80 to the port 5000 of a Flask app. So how do we do that? Is by creating a Nginx service. So we can create Nginx service by we can create a file named Flask app. We can do sudo nano etc/nginx. I'll just copy paste it. And now I can create the nginx config file, which I have written here as a template. This is just a standard uh, nginx file, which you can use for passing the proxy to your Flask app. So for the VM external IP, I'll go to my VM instance and the IP right here, which is under the external IP section, I will copy that. This is actually the IP where public would access my web app. So I'm going to paste it right here in front of server name. All right. And to save this file, I can do Control O, enter, and I'll just exit with Control X. So that's how I created my Nginx config file. Now we can actually create the Flask service file. The Flask service file is built for the process of starting up the Flask app whenever the VM is booted up. So whenever you close the VM, it will not shut up. Basically, that's the purpose of Flask service file. So let's create it. So first of all, before that, we actually need to start the Nginx service, and for that, we need to run the sudo ln command. So we can run these commands sudo ln -s and the path to our Nginx file, and then we put the path to the site's enabled Nginx file where the file will be running. And then we can run sudo systemctl restart Nginx to restart the Nginx service. Oh, I have one little mistake. I forgot a semicolon at the end of server name. So I'll just put that and save the file right now. And now if I run the previous commands, it should work right now. Where the file already exists, which I need to remove right now. All right, so now I've copied the sites available Flask app Nginx config to the sites enabled Flask app config. If for some reason it is not being created, just like in my case, it was showing that it is already created because I accidentally copied the wrong file to the sites enabled folder. Then you can remove the sites enabled folders file and then copy it again using sudo ln-s function. That will create a symbolic link to the file. All right, so now we can move ahead with our process. And for the next process, we have to create the Flask service app, which will actually run our Flask app all the time. So for that, we can use the sudo nano, and then we can create the file at this path. All right, so for this, I've also created a standard Flask app file, Flask service app file, which is present right here, which you can configure it accordingly. There can be many more arguments, but this is what you can do for a standard configuration. So exec start, this is basically the path to the VNV, and you have to run this command, which is gunicon -w represents the number of workers that will be handling your app. I have taken that as 4, and then I'm going to use the -b, which will bind this port, which is the localhost 5000 port, to the app.app function. All right. So if I save this file with Control O, enter, and then Control X, now I'm ready to run this Flask service file. And how do we run this Flask service file is basically, first of all, we have to run the sudo systemctl daemon reload. This will reload all the services which we have edited. And after that, we can run sudo systemctl start Flask app, which will actually run the Flask app service. And then we can enable it to also enable the app service. All right, so I'll just run all the three files, and now I think our app should be running. So for testing, I can check the status using sudo systems ctl status and the name of my service, which is flask app.service. All right, so the service is running as it is saying enabled, and preset is also enabled, and the active status is active and running. So I believe that our app should now be accessible at our external IP. Let's test it out. So we can see that this is actually, all right, I'll just copy this IP and then I can go to this IP. All right, so as the last step, we can actually restart our Nginx service as well, which will finally apply all the changes we have done to our Flask service as well. And now you can see that this is the test Flask app, which I actually copied to the repository. This is the app which I had made for testing purposes. This is clearly visible on our IP address. So yeah, basically that's how we host a Flask app on a GCP VM. And yeah, so guys, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching.